You hear the music, you hear the sweet sounds. That means we are back again. I know the look's a little different, the name might be a little different, but those that are familiar with what we do here, it's all the same. NFL season right around the corner. We are back. My name is Sheldon Alexander. This is called the Clutch Picks Podcast. I'm joined by my guy, as always, score betting writer, Mr. Matt Russell. We're here again. It's that time of year. How do you feel on the brink of the NFL season, my dude?
Buddy, I'm kind of nervous, man. It's like first day of school type stuff. I had to dust off the camera, get the lights going here. Listen, there's got to be a more modern musical reference than Thin Lizzy's The Boys Are Back in Town. But I feel like that should be the jam that we're pumping right now. Like, how is, and if anybody's listening to this out there, like, let us know, like, what's the more modern reference for, like, just getting the boys back together to hang out, obviously talk a little football. I mean, when we talk gifts, right? If you don't think I'm throwing out an I want you to get the word that we're back up gif coming out at some point this week, like, you're sadly mistaken. But from a musical standpoint, the best I can think of is a 1970s, you know, I think hair metal rock song that's way too old.
I was going to go with maybe, and this is a little, I mean, it's newer than your reference, but still a little older. The We Dem Boys, Wiz Khalifa, you know, might be a little more hyped up. You know, the video, everyone's getting ready. Obviously, that was used heavy for, was it because he's a Pittsburgh guy, right? I feel like he's a Pittsburgh fan. Do I have that right? I feel like that was a big, or am I mixing up? Oh, no, I'm mixing up Black and Yellow. That's what I'm mixing up. Black and Yellow, yeah, anyways.
Which we might be deep into this season, by the way, not to spoil anything, but that might be appropriate as well.
So if you happen to stumble upon this podcast, though, and you haven't gotten the picture yet, you don't know what we do here. We talk NFL betting each and every single week. For those that might not know, we had a great year last year on the pod, just hitting winners all over the place. We're going to try to do that again. Obviously, once the season starts, we'll hit you with picks against the spread each and every week. This week, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about it's kind of our betting season preview. We're going to talk futures markets. We're going to talk all the awards. We're going to have a lot of fun previewing the season. But if you're not familiar with what we do on the normal episodes, we kind of go through each and every game. I hit you with an angle. Mr. Matt Russell comes in with what I like to call the information and education on where the line was, where it is, and where it could be going. It feels so good just to say that again. I can't wait till next week when we're hitting the picks again.
Right.
But I can't get too far ahead of myself, because right now, let's talk about the futures market. And we want to make this an interactive pod as well, right? So when you follow Matt, which you can do on the app formerly known as Twitter, right, at MRussAuthentic, hit us up. Let us know what you think each and every week. Follow along during the year, because this is the People's Podcast, the People's Picks Podcast, where we try to give you all the information you need from week to week. And let's get to it, because I'm just rambling right now because I'm so hype that the season is here. I can't believe we're doing it again. But you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to start in, well, those familiar with the pod will know why I'm starting in the NFC West. We're going to start out there, as I am a Niners fan, which people will quickly learn here. Lots of talk going on. And when we look at the numbers in the NFC West, obviously the Niners are heavy favorites at minus, I guess the consensus, depending on where you're getting your lines. Consensus appears to be at minus 177. The Seahawks coming in second. But I want to talk more so from a position where it's easy to say the Niners are going to win. That's super easy. Is there anything else that looks kind of spicy here in the NFC West?
Well, I'm actually just published mere minutes ago my division picks, divisional best bets for both the NFC and the AFC. And essentially the idea is, like, looking at all these favorites, man, it's the NFL. There's a lot of vulnerable favorites in a lot of these divisions. I would argue, I make the case that basically every division has a vulnerable favorite. And, you know, we are on the same page pretty frequently about the 49ers. Like, we have a long history in the, 3 or 4 years of doing this show together of me almost having to talk you into your 49ers, because you had the Jimmy G, you know, the wariness about Jimmy G, and me being like, man, like, I still think they can go far, and, you know, they get to a Super Bowl. I don't want to say, like, wholeheartedly I'm against the 49ers necessarily this year, but I think they're a really interesting case study for we have these betting markets that have been up all summer long. And that's the tough part. We'll talk about that next week in week 1. That's the tough part about dealing with some of this stuff, because in theory, if there was any value to any of these, in the sort of strictest of terms, somebody would have plucked it over the last couple of months, right? Whereas you have a few days from week, 6 to 7 to grab some value on teams week to week. But here we've had months to do it. And so when I look at their win total, it's around, it's 10.5 juice to the over. There's like one place where it's got 11.5, but that's juice to the under. Essentially 11 is kind of their expected win number here. And that's an 11-6 record. And when you look at the NFC, you go, okay, it's like 49ers, Eagles, and then like the Cowboys. And then there's kind of a drop off, I think most people think, to the rest of the league. And they sort of besmirch the good name of the NFC by giving it the wide open title, right? You never want to be in a wide open division. It means everybody stinks, essentially. And so I look at it and I go, man, like 11-6, like doesn't that feel like a very attainable number for the 49ers?
Yeah.
Like that, they feel like a 12-5 team. Like even 12-5 almost feels like it might be a disappointment for the 49ers based on the pedigree that they've had. And yet either all of this money has come in on the over and the odds makers don't care, or there hasn't been that much money coming in on the over. And so that's kind of like spidey sense. I kind of go like, all right, like the market isn't loving the 49ers as much as we necessarily might think. And then you go, okay, like why is that? Because they haven't lost a ton of players. They lose guys on the fringes. Obviously, D'Amico Ryan's defensive coordinator, he gets hired by the Texans, but certainly not the first time they've had a defensive coordinator hired away. And of course, they still have Kyle Shanahan as the offensive coordinator. I just go, okay, like, am I missing something? Because, you'll remember we kept betting on Brock Purdy essentially saying last year, like, it's not going to be that much of a drop-off. It's not going to be that much of a drop-off. Now, the good news for the 49ers last year is the end of that season, that last stretch where they won 6 games in a row, there wasn't really much in the way of competition, right? They were covering games, but they were playing the Commanders that had already kind of given up. I think Carson Wentz got involved in that game. And then they're facing the Cardinals, which, that was just the start of where the Cardinals are at right now. And the Raiders after they had already booted Derek Carr to the side, right? So a lot of that feel good Brock Purdy stuff kind of came against pretty easy teams. And you look and see how much offense they actually generated when Purdy was the quarterback. And there's some kind of sketchy low totals, like low 300s, mid 300s, the type of thing that would kind of really make them just kind of an average offensive team. And then of course they face the Cowboys in the playoffs. So obviously they beat Seattle. We'll talk about them in a second, but they go and they face the Cowboys. And remember, you probably remember watching that game going like, man, are these guys going to lose to the Cowboys? The game was like, 19-12 or something like that. Cowboys couldn't get it in the end zone. It was a very ugly game, right? And everybody's kind of, beats up on the Cowboys. But it's like, man, they were right there in San Francisco in that playoff game. And of course, everything, we don't know what happens in the NFC Championship game because Brock Purdy gets hurt. And listen, Josh Johnson wasn't going to do much anyway, but he leaves that game and the 49ers are left without a quarterback for half of that game. So, when it comes to Brock Purdy and the 49ers, like if they have a bunch more games on the schedule against Dallas, right? And I don't mean Dallas specifically. They do play Dallas once, but against Dallas-y type teams. And you look at the schedule, man, and there are like 7 out of division games that are very similar to the team that the Dallas Cowboys were from a rating standpoint last year. And you go like, man, that's 7 tough games. I don't know that they're necessarily going to lose all those games. So we haven't even gotten to, games that they might lose, as they might get upset, or even games in the division that they might lose, right? Like there's 7 games outside of the division that are going to be very difficult. So you can kind of see, man, like 5-6 losses might actually pile up here with the 49ers, especially if Brock Purdy isn't all necessarily that he's cracked up to be. I think if, from an eye test standpoint, you'll remember there's a lot of turnovers that Brock Purdy tried to throw that didn't necessarily fall into the hands of the defense last year. So, then you go to maybe there's some Sam Darnold in our lives, who knows, right? But that's still a very shaky situation. Obviously, the Trey Lance thing didn't necessarily work out. And so all that is to say, I'm looking at the Seattle Seahawks as value here at anything plus 200 or better. Their defense is going to be drastically different. They've got, I think, probably around 7, maybe more new starters or starters that are coming back. Jamal Adams coming back from an injury. Bobby Wagner rejoins the team. Their big thing last year, you remember, is they couldn't stop the run to save their life. Well, the 49ers just gobbled that up, right? They just turn around and give the ball to Christian McCaffery, and we're having a field day in the last games of the regular season and, of course, the playoff game. So I look at it and I go, if you know what your problem is and you go out and you try to fix it, which is what the Seahawks have done the last couple of years, and you crush the draft by getting 2 offensive tackles 2 years ago, a cornerback last year and a cornerback this year, that's securing some pretty significant, important positions on the field beyond the kind of fantasy football ones. Of course, you also get Jackson Smith and Jigba, right? They are getting what they want out of that Russell Wilson deal. Like, that might turn into one of the best trades maybe of all time here by the end of this sort of next iteration of the Seahawks. And I'm not saying the Seahawks are necessarily better than the 49ers. I just know that this, I just think that this could be closer to 2 teams around 11-6. And if you're giving me plus 225 on the Seahawks, or you're asking me to pay minus 177, minus 190 in some places on the 49ers, I'm going to start by taking the Seahawks here because they turn things around quick. And as much as we kind of make fun of Pete Carroll sometimes, that's pretty quick turnaround, and they've done a nice little job here.
And I think this is a great place to start because we're giving people kind of insight into how to bet, right? Like, it's easy to come out and say, hey, we think the Niners are the best, and Niners, the line shows you that. But again, when you're talking about value, there's a difference there in terms of the things that we look at in making picks throughout the season. And especially when you're talking about here at the start of the year, value picks are key. And the Niners hype, listen, as you said, last year you did have to talk me into the Niners hype because the thing is, it's like Jimmy G, like, I'm not expecting Jimmy G to take us to the promised land. And guess what? He didn't. But it was only further proven to be the case because Brock Purdy was able to come in and maintain the ship. So the fact that you're going into this season again with the same sort of, not question marks at QB, but it's not like you're thinking you got Tom Brady back there. You know what I mean? So should the Niners be that much of like everyone just penciling them in to make it to, the championship game yet again? I mean, the defense can only do so much year in, year out, like the injuries on the offense can only, sustain, and, you have playmakers at every position on offense, but can Purdy take the next level in his development and just not mess that up? Or will they need more than just someone who is a game manager, essentially, right, to actually make it and be like this long of a favorite to win their division?
And like with anything else, right, it's all relative to expectations, right? So talking about the 49ers at a time when they would play the Rams and be home underdogs by a couple of points.
Exactly.
And having to talk to people into the 49ers from that sort of starting point. Now the starting point is like really, really high, right? Yeah. And so now it's like, okay, we're talking about Brock Purdy or quarterback X, right? Whether it's Jimmy G or whatever, and just going like, man, you just have to be okay to be an 11-win team. And that would push them over their win total the last few years. Well, now that their win total is 11, it's like, okay, to get over 11, I'm going to need more than just be okay to keep the ship, steering in the right direction. Now, I don't even hate the idea of betting the 49ers in sort of high-end circumstance, win the Super Bowl, win the NFC. I mean, their odds are a little bit sketchy there. The best way for me to bet the 49ers is just bet Christian McCaffery Offensive Player of the Year, because he's going to be the guy that they rely on anyway. And so if they have success, he can win that award without them even winning the division. He can go and put up a 2,000-yard all-purpose from scrimmage yardage season, be awesome, have 15 touchdowns, and be the guy that, Purdy's dropping the ball off to, handing the ball off to, the run game is still really good, et cetera, et cetera. Like, that's the way to, like, back that team. So I'm looking at that and just going, like, okay, I'm going to just do that. And then I don't have to worry about all the other stuff when it comes to San Francisco, because I still think there's a couple of, dollars worth of value on McCaffery based on sort of how he's done in previous seasons.
So the thing too, why is McCaffery the one you would like to pick from that Niners high-powered offense?
Because
just out of curiosity.
He's the easiest guy to get the ball to. right?
Okay.
Like Debo require, first of all, they don't give him the ball that much. When he gets the ball, right? Like it's often an impact play, right?
Yeah.
But McCaffery is going to be the guy who's going to get the ball thrown to him maybe 10 times in a game. He's going to get 15 carries, right? He's getting the ball behind the line of scrimmage, which allows for the offensive line and the scheme to create yardage for him, which is the strength of the 49ers. Whereas, throwing it to somebody down the field, the Kittles, the Ayuks of the world, that's going to require Brock Purdy to advance the ball, and do most of the heavy lifting in a lot of ways, right? And so it's like, well, if the 49ers are going to be good, the offense has to take a step up. If the offense takes a step up, I think that's going to be Christian McCaffrey, laden, if you will. And same thing goes for the defense, right? Instead of betting on the 49ers as a team because of where their prices are, Nick Bosa to win Defensive Player of the Year again. I am absolutely in on that. We won with him last year. His odds are actually longer this year because he's currently in a contract holdout. Everything you read about that holdout is that both parties, the team and him, are just kind of like, yeah, like it's business. We're not really worried about it. We'll get him in now. Like we're getting kind of close to the season here, and it would be nice for like the breaking news alert to come across our screen here on Nick Bosa. But like, he just won it last year. This is an award. You have a lot of these awards where you don't see guys win it back to back. Defensive Player of the Year, there is a small pool of impact defensive players of the year who are candidates to win this award. We've had Aaron Donald win it 3 times in 4 years. There was the J.J. Watt 3 times in 4 years, right? Like guys win this on repeat. I think Nick Bosa is capable of winning it on repeat. He just has to get into the lineup. Maybe he even misses a week here. Who knows? But in the end, I think he can put up enough stats once he gets in, and we're getting a decent price on it because he's not technically, on the roster or sort of in the active roster, or he hasn't even showed up to San Francisco, I don't think yet. So, those are the two sort of high-end ways I would play San Francisco. But from a value standpoint, to me, it's Seattle in the division just based on the price.
I understand. I find that so interesting. And I love just kind of the way, because I always want to kind of recap it for the people who are tuning into the pod so they understand kind of the way that we're talking about it, because it might be a little different than you're used to in terms of how you want to look at these bets and the markets that we're hitting here, right? So when we talk, first off, just want to recap it as we talk about the first go at the NFC West. The value bet is the Seattle Seahawks at plus 210 to win the division. Now, obviously, as Matt just mentioned, the way that you want to talk about the Niners, right? There's different ways you can go at it in terms of betting on your San Francisco, or I should say my San Francisco 49ers. I know, you know what I'm saying. But one way we could do that is with Christian McCaffrey, who consensus is what I'm putting up, because obviously you can see the lines at different numbers at different places. But Christian McCaffrey at plus 1,400 to win Offensive Player of the Year, which I think, it makes a lot of sense. And an offense that could do a lot of damage this year, even with Brock Purdy, right? Because the way that we saw McCaffrey come in last year and really just kind of not miss a beat jumping into that play. And I know I was going crazy in the playoffs, that crazy run he had. So totally understand that there. And the last value bet for the NFC West, according to the man, the myth, the legend that is Mr. Matt Russell, Nick Bosa at plus 1,000. Again, we're doing consensus here to win Defensive Player of the Year. There are 3 separate bets we can give you here that you can look at and say, hey, this might be something that you can make a little sprinkle on, something to sit back and cheer for throughout the NFL season. That's what we try to do. Just put you in position to get some winners. Do we want to switch to the AFC? No, let's stick in the NFC here. Let's go through the NFC. And is there anything else you had there?
Well, I was going to say we should at least say some words about the Rams and the Cardinals, right? They do actually exist. Obviously, everybody's low on both those teams, and neither team has really any chance of winning the division. And the thing is, like, you have to put up odds for the Cardinals. Their implied win probability, which is taking the odds and translating it into a percentage chance of them winning the division, is like 2.5% chance. Well, that's about 2.5% chance more than I think that the Cardinals have of winning the division. I think that's 2.5% chance more than the Cardinals think that they have for winning the division. And I would also lump the Rams in there with them because they have effectively 3 players, 2 of which are frequently injured, 2 of which contemplated retirement in the offseason, right? Like that's not really a great brew when it comes to, what the Rams got cooking up over there. So there's some win probability over there that like should be 0, but has to be something. And I just think that applies more to Seattle than it does San Francisco, because I think the San Francisco number is actually probably pretty correct. I think it's just Seattle that should probably take all of that win probability from those other teams. Now, that being said, kind of in the same light, and this is maybe a theme for this podcast, every podcast we've ever done, Cooper Kupp, I think there's some value on him to lead the league in, a little bit in receiving yards, but what I like more is touchdowns. And listen, the Rams might only score 1 touchdown per game this season because, by the way, even when Stafford and Kupp were in the lineup last year, they averaged like 16 points a game. Like, the Rams didn't stink because Stafford and Kupp missed the second half of the season. They were stinking long before, right?
Yeah.
That those injuries happened. That being said, if Kupp is healthy, and, listen, a little hamstring injury to start the preseason wasn't ideal, but he wasn't going to play in the preseason games anyway, because the Rams never, even when it was like uncouth, they never played their main guys in the preseason anyway. So he's sort of a little bit under the radar. And I wouldn't necessarily burn like a first round pick on him in like fantasy or like break the bank in an auction in fantasy football. But we are getting like a 10-1 or better price on him to lead the league in receiving touchdowns. And they love that run, 3 yards away from the end zone. Like somehow Cooper Kupp is always open. It's either like one pylon, the other pylon, this or that. Like they might not score more than 1 touchdown a game, but that 1 touchdown a game might come from Cooper Kupp. So if there was any way to positively back either of those teams this year, now we'll see where their rating sort of goes in the middle of the season, and we might have to be, taking them plus some big points. But like the best way to back them right now is the best guy on the team, and obviously outside of Aaron Donald, like that's Cooper Kupp. And so him to score the most touchdowns, I think, is really interesting because when he got hurt, it was that, right? He had 800 yards through 8 games. He had 6 touchdowns through 8 games, even though the offense was not very good. So he was kind of already on pace for a 13, 14 touchdown type season. And, listen, a lot of the really good wide receivers, the Justin Jeffersons of the world, are just that. Like, they're really good. But, like, they also sometimes only get 9, 10, 11 touchdowns, right? The touchdown market is a very sort of weird market for both rushing and receiving. And so we're getting a little bit of value here on Kupp. So I wanted to include that because if he should be back, he's been back at practice this week. He's, again, under the radar because all of us are very low on them as a team. And, yeah, I think, listen, if he gets injured and things go badly, maybe a Rams for least points, that's a pretty nice bet, sort of working on the downside of things, so it's kind of like one way or another. You might have a chance here. Like if Kupp is injured, the offense goes down, at least points, maybe even a worse record in the league. Though, again, the Cardinals, I think, are like openly trying to get that. So least points for the Rams has a pretty good number attached to it. But I also think if things go, honestly, as best as they possibly could, Cooper Kupp is the best bet to score the most touchdowns from a receiving standpoint. It's best bet involving the Cardinals or the Rams this season.
Shouts to those teams for sure. Let's switch gears here to the always interesting NFC East. And there's some interesting odds here. You have the Eagles, and again, I'm going to keep repeating it, consensus here, right? Eagles at -125, followed up by the Cowboys at +177, the Giants at +724, and the Commanders at +1300. This is super interesting here. And the one thing that stands out to me when I look at this division is that most years, there's a regression from a team that made the Super Bowl, right? Mm-hmm. Now, barring injury, it's tough for me to say that I see Patrick Mahomes-led team struggle. Those familiar with what we do here on this pod will also know that I rarely see Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs struggle as I continuously bet on them each and every single week to cover spreads. We'll get there during the season for sure.
Yeah.
But that leads me to the Philadelphia Eagles here. And as I just said, them at -125, that has me looking at the Cowboys at +177 here, getting some pretty solid value, I would think. What say you, my friend?
It sounds to me like you have somehow, you're monitoring my screen because I just wrote this morning about how, honestly, the longer the season or the off season, I should say, goes, the more I sort of get into a couple of teams that I didn't necessarily think I was going to be that into, right? And a lot of it is reflecting back on last season and going like, man, a couple of plays here and a couple of plays there, and it changes the point of view. And there's actually sort of in the bottom half of the division here that this also applies. So let's not get out of here without talking about the bottom half of this division. But I'm with you, man. Like I look at it and I go, we never saw the Cowboys and Eagles at full strength against each other, right? When they played in Philadelphia, it was Cooper Rush. When they played in Dallas, it was Gardner Minshew. Like we never saw that head-to-head in true fashion. Now, other than that head-to-head, right, like you're relying on things like strength of schedule and also timing of when you play teams, right? So week 1 last year, it's a year ago, almost to the day, but do you remember what happened on Sunday night to the Cowboys a year ago? They got shut the bleep down by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, losing like 19-3, the game where Dak got hurt. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, you look at the Bucs throughout the rest of the season, you go like, that was the high point for the Bucs, including when the rematch happened in Tampa Bay when the Cowboys beat the brakes off of the Bucs. So if they don't play that game in the first week, they play that game mid-season, late season, or obviously in the playoffs like they did, I kind of think the Cowboys turned that L into a W, right? Mm-hmm. And then you look, obviously, the last game of the season that Philly's so far ahead because of piling up these wins against, honestly, one of the softest schedules in the league, and honestly, one of the softest schedules we've seen in recent memory. Like, do you even remember what the high-profile game that the Eagles played was? Like, where was their matchup against the Chiefs, the Bills, or whatever during the regular season, right? But they did what they needed to do. They kept on winning because they're a very good team. That's not the argument here. But the point is they built up that lead so that the Cowboys' meaningless Week 18 game. So they lose that game. They kind of dump that away to Washington. They didn't give a bleep about that, right? And so you have these, you know, bookend losses on the season that was otherwise a 3-loss season, which is the same amount of losses that the Eagles had, right? So it's like, yeah, you know what? I bet you in the middle, if they played Washington in the middle of the season, Cowboys probably have a little more interest in winning that game. I bet you if they played the Bucs in the middle of the season, obviously we saw what happened to the Bucs basically right after that Cowboy game. Like, this is a team that probably could have been the quality of a 14-3 team. Let's maybe even say 13-4. Whereas the Eagles, you know, probably, again, because of their record, 14-3, or because of their schedule, 14-3, a little bit inflated. They're probably around a 13-4, 12-5 type of team. So I think both those teams are pretty equal. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, like we talked about, we saw Dallas compete in San Francisco against a full, you know, roster San Francisco team. And then we didn't even get that with Philadelphia playing San Francisco in the NFC Championship game, right?
Can you please not remind me about that? I'm trying to look forward here. I'm not trying to look back at that game. It still hurts my feelings, okay?
Yeah, Damn, Josh Johnson. So listen, Philadelphia proved that they were a good team by housing the teams that they needed to beat and playing, you know, right there with Kansas City. So this is by no means besmirching the good name of the Philadelphia Eagles. And if both teams were sort of equal pricing here, like you have plus 177 up here, there's a lot of plus 200s for the Cowboys out there, right? And I think it's important differentiation to know that, like, if you win with the Cowboys, you can lose 2 other bets on even money plays and still break even. You know what I mean? So, like, getting plus 200 or better from just a sort of pure small sample accounting standpoint, when we're making all of these plays, like Seattle in the last division that we talked about, as long as these are plus 200 or better, we can make 3 of these bets and just try to win one of them to be at least sort of a tiny bit profitable or break even. So like, make sure you find the plus 200 or better out there for the Cowboys. But yeah, I'm right there with you. Like, honestly, I think the Cowboys are sitting on a big season. Now it's easy to look at it and go like, Mike McCarthy's involved, and like, man, I get it. That's why it took me sort of as long as it's taken me to kind of like the Cowboys in a lot of markets. And since we're talking about the Cowboys, I'm going to fire them off to you right now. I think Dak's ready for a big season, man. It was 4 years ago that he was second in the league in touchdowns or yardage. I can't remember which one it was. You'll have to read my piece over at the Score to get that information accurate, because it's all in one ear and out the other. But the point is he's had a couple of injury-plagued seasons since then. He's also had Ezekiel Elliott around, how many times do you think they gave Ezekiel Elliott the ball last year, Shell?
Way too many.
Yeah, that's correct. It was 230 times.
Yeah.
That's 230 plays this season where hand it to Zeke isn't going to be like said at any point, whether it's from the owner's box or, you know, or the coach's box necessarily, right?
You mean how many
And, like,
times are they going to run it into the line on first and second down with Zeke? It's
yeah.
like, oh no, third and long again. Come on, Dak.
Or by the goal line where Zeke had 12, I think, touchdowns last year, right? And you go, okay, well, all of those could go to Tony Pollard. And you're right. A bunch of them are going to go to Tony Pollard, but he had 190 carries last year.
Mm-hmm.
And he's not a guy who's going to get 300 carries, right? He's just not built that way. That's not the point of Tony Pollard. The point of Tony Pollard is explosive, get him out in space, maybe throw him the football as well, right?
Yeah.
And so if you're taking 230 plays, maybe you're throwing, I don't know, 40 more carries to get 230 in Pollard's hands. Maybe there's going to be, 80 carries to a backup running back, just because that's kind of how things work. There's going to be a lot more throwing, I think, for Dak Prescott. And if he just goes to his average of 7.5 yards per attempt, he could be up into the 5,000s from a yardage standpoint this season. So I love him. I love CD Lamb. He's on this sort of pace where he is like this close, especially if Dak can stay healthy, which now that he's not really running that much anymore, like, you had the fluke injury. I think slamming his hand on a helmet in week 1. If he doesn't have that fluke injury, right, and he plays 17 games, CD Lamb, who's gone up basically 300 yards per season in the 3 years that he's been. By the way, CD Lamb is 24 years old. He's younger than Jalen Waddle and Devontae Smith. Guys who it feels like they just got in the league, and it feels like CD Lamb has been in the league forever. I don't know, like maybe that's just me, but I like CD Lamb as a potential guy who like does the Justin Jefferson thing where it's 1,800 receiving yards and double-digit touchdowns on a team that's like maybe wins the division, as we've talked about. And maybe he's the offensive player of the year, right? In a league that has sort of leaned a little bit more towards a receiver, Cooper Kupp, obviously 2 years ago, and Justin Jefferson last year. Maybe it's CD Lamb this year who has that big season. So I'm big on Dak Prescott. I'm big on CD Lamb type stuff. The defense is good enough, obviously, to get them wins, but it's not necessarily good enough that like they're going to be playing in these low scoring games. Like, the Cowboys give up points because they play kind of a high-risk style, right, where they're trying to turn you over, trying to force fumbles, trying to get interceptions, et cetera, et cetera. So, like the Cowboys a lot at the prices that the Cowboys are at, and the Cowboys are at these prices because of how good the Eagles are and how good the people think the Eagles are. And I don't disagree with them. The Eagles are very good. I just think they're accurately priced, whereas Dallas is sort of a little bit kind of under the radar as a top team.
Yeah, that's an interesting number too. As you mentioned, Dak Prescott, I was just looking that up at plus 1,800 for most passing yards for Dak Prescott. That's an interesting line there, right? And you're talking about, very good value there with a guy that we've seen do it in the past. It's more about, can he stay healthy and can they refocus their offense to the air attack that we know they're capable of with the weapons that he has, the aforementioned CD Lamb. Anything else in the NFC East, as we look at the couple of the other teams there?
Yeah, I mean, and it's funny talking about the Cowboys here and going, liking them as much, and it isn't the same thing as the last division where it's like, those other two teams, I hate those other two teams. Let's take some of the win probability for the division away from them. Listen, the Commanders are very interesting at a double-digit price. Just to talk about them for a second here, and there's a reason, there's reason to like the Giants, right? You're getting a second-year Brian Daboll, Daniel Jones combination. They have obviously added to their weaponry when it comes to guys that he can throw to, et cetera, et cetera. The defense will probably be a little bit better this season. The thing is, maybe you remember the Sunday Night Football game where the Giants went to the Commanders. Remember, there was the Commanders scored a touchdown to either tie it or take the lead. And there was this, he was off the line of scrimmage penalty. Yeah. And everybody's kind of arguing, oh, was he off? Did he get himself reset? Well, it was this very ticky-tack penalty that, was a penalty, but at the same time, it didn't really change what would happen on that play. He didn't score the touchdown because of the penalty. I get why it had to be called, but, if he scores that touchdown, the records flip. The Commanders are the team that somehow makes the playoff, with the garbage quarterback duo of Taylor Heineke and Carson Wentz. Now, we don't know necessarily how good Sam Howell is necessarily going to be, but there was a time in our lives not that long ago where Sam Howell was considered a first-round, maybe even a high first-round pick from a talent standpoint. Now, things got got a little weird in his last year. I believe it was the COVID year at North Carolina, and he ends up falling down the draft board. But he looked pretty good at the end of last season. He's looked pretty good in preseason. You know, you've heard the comments from Ron Rivera, how he has admitted that despite the fact that Sam Howell was on his team, on his roster at practice every day, he said, if somebody had just told me he was this good, you know, we would have been way better off last season. It's like, you're the coach. You're the one who's supposed to be making this decision, man. Like, look alive out there, bro. And so, you know, he obviously thinks that Sam Howell is pretty good. And so, listen, the problem with the Commanders is they got a really tough schedule. Their first game notwithstanding this year, speaking of popular survivor picks, getting the Commanders out of the way is going to be something that people do a lot in week 1. They got a really tough schedule, so it's hard to kind of make the case of like, oh, yeah, like they could sneak their way to a 10 or 11 win season again, especially when they have 2 teams in that division who I think are a pretty good lock to get to double-digit wins. So it's going to be more of a week-to-week type of thing with the Commanders. You know, they have a lot of interesting players, but none of which I can necessarily trust with Sam Howell just yet to have like offensive player of the year, Terry McLaurin type years. But like, there are enough guys on that team and an awesome defensive line. You know, maybe a Chase Young comeback player of the year, I think is interesting. He's around 50 to 1. There's even some 100 to 1s on him. So he is something that I would get involved in. And then, like I said, the Giants, I think the Giants are going to be improved. I don't know that that necessarily means a better record though, because they kind of got away with a lot of stuff last year to get the record that they have. They might just be another kind of like 9-win season, but this time it's like an appropriate 9-win season instead of like pulling off a bunch of upsets to get to 9 wins type of a season for the Giants.
No, I totally got you there. And when you mentioned the Commanders, it made me think of the success over the and we'll get into this when we get into the season and the betting lines and all that. But hearing really made me think about, hearing you talk about the Commanders really made me think about betting on the Texans the last few years, right? And how they were always like massive underdogs, double-digit underdogs like every single week, or at least like a touchdown underdog every single week.
Sure.
And it's like great value there on a team that can keep it spicy, as I like to say. They might not win you games, but they can cover some spreads. I like that.
They'll play 60 minutes. Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
No, I think the Commanders are better than the 60-minute team, but they're being priced like they are kind of in that range. Yeah.
Exactly. Totally with you there. Let's keep things moving here. I want to switch to the NFC South. And when we head there, this is a very interesting division to me. Obviously, there's a lot of turnover, a lot of interesting moves with, you know, new quarterbacks in different places. But as we look up here, you got the Saints at plus 110. And again, I'm going to keep repeating it. We're doing the consensus odds here. We don't want to give love to one sports book over the other as of yet. We'll more on that later. But the Saints at plus 110. You got the Falcons at plus 200. The Panthers at plus 412. And the Bucks at plus 800. Baker doesn't seem to be feeling too dangerous here now, does he, this season? But when I give you those numbers, is there something that stands out to you the most?
Well, there's a couple of things. So first of all, I bet the Saints at like plus 135 like 6 months ago when these first came out. Because I'm looking at these other teams and I'm like, don't like that, don't like that, don't like that. Like the number has to at the very least drop when it comes to the Saints. And it has. So like mission accomplished. I got 25 cents to 30 cents of quote unquote value on my Saints to win the division bet. Here we are. It's almost September 1st. I don't like this Saints bet one bit, even at the price that I got it, right? So I'm probably going to bail out of this bet. Toot sweet. And we'll talk about that a little bit more next week when it comes to their week 1 game. I mean, yeah, the Saints like cannot be bet at this price. The universe loves the Atlanta Falcons, which is just a wild thing to sort of say. And then I have seen nothing from the Carolina Panthers. And the Panthers are interesting because like they make the trade for Bryce Young and you go, okay, Carolina got their quarterback of the future. Bryce Young is awesome. And then you go and you look at the depth chart for the Carolina Panthers and it's just gross. You're just looking around just like Adam Thielen, like is the best we can do. Like that guy's not playing 17 games this season. And like Miles Sanders, like just kind of a dude, like just kind of a guy. Like it's a rough scene. And you just go like, man, I don't think the Panthers are going to be good at all. And of course you go, like you said, Baker Mayfield, you know, our coaching staff. I didn't want to single one guy out because, listen, the offensive coordinator situation wasn't any good last year either for the Bucs. And you're like, man, I don't love that either. But then you look at the number next to the Buccaneers, who won the division last year.
Yeah.
And you go like, there's some 10-1s out there. 10-1 in a division that, like, last year, I think he needed 7 wins to win, or 8 wins, you know, to win. And you look at their depth chart and, like, yeah, the idea of, like, backing a team that was wildly disappointing against the point spread, like historically bad against the point spread last year, who lost the greatest quarterback of all time, like, doesn't really seem like a thing I'm like, let's get in on that team. But you start throwing around 10-1s, like, find me a 10-1 double-digit, you know, underdog here to win their division that I can make a better case for, because they still have a pretty good roster. The defense is still the same, by and large, defense that they've had these last few years. The same defense that held the Cowboys in that first game to 3 points, right? Like, as long as those guys are healthy, the Levante Davids, the Devin Whites, Vita Vea, Shaq Barrett, Troy Inca, like, all these guys, like, and the entire secondary is, like, basically guys who have, like, made or almost made a Pro Bowl team. And then, by the way, like, I watched a little, you know, Johnny Manziel documentary this past offseason, and I'm reminded that, and they didn't really touch on this, like, they kind of skirted a lot of things. A lot of Johnny Manziel's season was kind of just throwing the ball up to a certain wide receiver by the name of Mike Evans. Yeah, like, Mike Evans was the dude on that team, right? Like, he didn't get the headlines, but it was literally Johnny runs around, throws it up high, Mike Evans comes down with it, everything's okay. Mike Evans still on the team, right? And, like, Baker Mayfield to Mike Evans, like, might actually be worth something. And that's kind of better than any option that Baker Mayfield had with the Cleveland Browns, had with the Carolina Panthers. And then, by the way, like, Baker played pretty well when he went to the Rams last season. So I don't think Baker is necessarily, like, the worst thing ever. I know that, listen, we've had this conversation, and in a lot of times we talk about him as being the worst thing ever. But it's usually based off of the standard that, you know, these odds are asking us to believe in, right? The Browns as, like, you know, I think they were, like, close to the favorite 2 years ago in the AFC North. Remember, like, people are getting all excited with the Browns roster, and it's like, yeah, but with Baker Mayfield, like, no, man. Like, we're talking about the other end of the spectrum, double digits, 10-1 to be a professional team here and to maybe win 8 games. Like, I think this is your best bet as far as, like, a double digit, like, wait, how did this team win the division? And then we'll be sitting back after we say, how did this team win the division? And go, oh, they won it last year.
And also, as you just mentioned, like, it's not like it's a murderer's row in the rest of the division either, right? Like, we can see all of these other teams just falling apart. So I totally get it. Like, this is a division of parity.
They don't even have to fall apart. They just have to, like, be themselves. Dennis Allen is the coach of the New Orleans Saints. My guy's career record is 18-47, Shell. 18-47. Like, he doesn't have to fall apart. He just has to be amazing. Dennis Allen.
Yeah.
He has to be himself.
I'm writing it here as a consensus at plus 800, but also I'm reaffirming it for the people listening at home so that you hear it clearly on your ride home. You can search out and find the double digits there and find the plus 1,000 bet here for the Bucs to win the division. So search that out, seek that out, get there, do it, figure out what's going on in the NFC South, because it will be a wild division this year, that NFC South. What else are we thinking?
If the Commanders, sorry to interrupt you, if the Commanders can somehow swap their way into the NFC South, then, like, absolutely, give me the Commanders to win that division. I think the Commanders might be better than any of the teams in the NFC South. So that just tells you where we are at here, where people are tripping over themselves to bet on the Falcons, as if Desmond Ridder is a better quarterback option than Baker Mayfield is necessarily. So, as far as, any futures market is concerned with regards to the NFC South.
Listen, we've just spent a lot of time dissing this division. There's no need to force anything here in the NFC South. We can just move on if there's nothing that stands out to you as well, because I also feel like when you're talking about giving out a number that could be that great. And again, we're talking value bets here. When you look at the rest of the odds in this division, you're talking about anywhere from plus 800 to plus 1,000. Hey, that's a good get right there, people. That's a good get. I feel comfortable enough moving on to the NFC North if you do, my friend.
Yeah, let's absolutely do that.
As we move and switch gears to the NFC North, we look up and we see the Detroit Lions. Like, times are changing here. Times are changing here in the NFC North. We got the Detroit Lions at plus 135, the Vikings at plus 265, the Packers plus 367, and the Bears at plus 420. Now, again, consensus lines going there. But when we look at the NFC North, this looks way different than it has for like the last, 2 decades?
Yeah, for sure. And it's like, should it?
Should it, right? I mean, so here's what I'll say, right? When I look at this, the Lions have been like the sneaky team for the last however many seasons where it's like, ooh, the Lions are pesky. The Lions are pesky. They're really good. They're close. You know, what's my guy's name? Why am I drawing a blank?
Dan Campbell. He's got some stuff brewing. Man Campbell. Yes. Right. He's got them fired up. Is this actually the year? It could be. The Vikings, we know, are a squad that the absolute bleepery each and every week. You can count on the Vikings for that. Jordan Love, I have no idea what to make of that dude. And then you got the Bears at plus 420. And I got to be honest with you here. If I'm talking about a value pick here, I'm looking at the Bears. I'm looking at this in a situation where, listen, I'm not saying that the Bears are going to, win this division. I'm just saying when I look at all these other numbers, I mean, the Bears made some moves to help out on offense. We know Justin Fields can try to stay healthy, which is probably the biggest wild card, like to say that because the way that he plays and the style of play, I get that. But I like the sneaky plus 420 with the Bears there if we're looking at a long shot value pick for me. What say you? Yeah, I like sneakiness in this division. I just don't like that sneakiness necessarily in this division.
You don't like that QB sneak? Too many QB sneaks for the Bears.
Listen, that's their best option offensively, like by a mile. I'll put it this way. So summertime, right? I'm like, I have to reintroduce myself to the family and then of course say goodbye to them by, late August. Yep. So you end up finding yourself in some strange places in the summertime, or at least I do, right? Because I, have to at least connect with friends and family. And I find myself at a like a swap meet, like market type setup. For my brother-in-law's got a woodworking setup over there. Shout out Timber Truck Designs. And so I'm spending the afternoon essentially with my nephew, and he's got the iPad out because every kid has to have their iPad at all times. And he's just hit the age where he wants to watch the top 100 plays of the NFL season from last year, right? Like, I'm like, listen, we'll start there, right? We don't, we'll get to full games eventually, but let's just start with some of the outstanding plays. And it's like Justin Fields run after Justin Fields run in the top 20 to 25. Yeah. And he didn't ask me this question, but I sort of thought to myself, like, hey, with all this Justin Fields awesome play, top 20, 4 plays in the top 20, like, did the Bears win any of these games? And the answer is no. They won none of the games, right? It's why they had the first pick that they could trade to get some stuff from Carolina. Mm-hmm. Obviously, some of that stuff is DJ Moore and like,
let's go. Big DJ Moore guy. I'm a big DJ Moore guy.
Sure, absolutely. Like, yeah, I get that. But like, we also thought when that trade happened, you go, okay, Bears are setting themselves up for the future, but there's a lot of draft picks involved. Now, they did a nice job to get DJ Moore and to still get, good players in that draft. But like, a lot of that hasn't been realized in the form of actual players. And then we were also like, okay, well, they got all this, salary cap, space. And then they kind of didn't really do much with it this off season. And so like the defense, I think, is still going to be like maybe the worst. And, the Justin Fields like run plays are all awesome when like no one's really expecting you to run, which through the first half of the season, the Bears weren't really using Justin Fields as they should have from a running, perspective. So it's like the Bears didn't even know he was really good. It's like Ron Rivera's coaching the Bears or something. Like, if somebody had told me this guy could run, I would have done this a long time ago. It's like, you're the coach. And so they go, oh, by the way, like, Justin Fields is a really awesome runner, really awesome scrambler. And then for the last 8 weeks, again, he puts up those highlight plays. They don't win any of the actual games. And so this idea that, like, well, Justin Fields, like, he's awesome, like, they're going to win a bunch of games, like 10, 11, 12, like, whoa, easy. Let's try, like, 4. Like, let's start there, or like 6, maybe. Like, I feel like 6 is kind of a successful season. And so if you want to, so all these people are like throwing money at Justin Fields to win MVP, like apparently ignoring the fact that, like, you kind of have to play on a good team to win MVP, right? And it's like, that's going to require like 14 wins, 13 wins, something along those lines. If you really are dying to bet on the Bears and be on the Justin Fields and watching those plays happen every week and go like, this is awesome, he's going to win X award, or they're going to win X whatever, let's take the entire rest of the Bears team out of the equation and only bet on Justin Fields, not to win MVP, but to win Offensive Player of the Year, because his numbers are trending, all of basically one season. But his numbers are trending to look a lot like Lamar Jackson, Cam Newton in their big years, Jalen Hurts last year, all guys who were either won Offensive Player of the Year or were in the top 3. And you don't have to be on the best team. Justin Jefferson last year wasn't on the best team. Like, yes, they won the division, but you don't necessarily even have to win the division to win this award. Sure, it helps. But if your numbers are such, and that you're like, Offensive Player of the Year is kind of like the fun award, right? Where like MVP is like the responsible guys award, where it's like, well, you really played well, and you put your tie on, you showed up for work every day, and like you made the playoffs. And then like the Offensive Player of the Year is like, you did a lot of really sick stuff. You ended up on, the highlights every week. You put up video game style numbers. And honestly, we don't really care if your team won or not. And like, to me, that's the way to back the Bears. So like, that's my stance on the Bears and Justin Fields. Just go Offensive Player of the Year. I believe around 20 to 25 to 1 for Offensive Player of the Year. As far as this division is concerned and the sneakiness is concerned, like we just talked about at the start, like, should this look a lot different than the past years? My answer is no. The Packers are replacing a quarterback who turned 40, whose age is higher than his quarterback rating was last season. So if I didn't tell you that it was Aaron Rodgers, I told you it was Carson Wentz or something like that, you'd be like, this is great. They're also replacing him with a quarterback that's been in the system for 2 years, who was a first-round pick. Like, have you heard this story before in Green Bay? Like, if they didn't have anything, if they were in practice, again, speaking of Ron Rivera, if they were Ron Rivera and were like, I didn't even know Jordan Love was on the team. Like, if that was the case, then I would be like, no, man, like, I don't think so. But like, they know, I think, that Jordan Love can execute the offense that Matt LaFleur wants to run. Matt LaFleur got hired in the middle, obviously, of the Aaron Rodgers era. Aaron Rodgers has his guys, and he's got his plays. And if you're not vibing with that, like, we're going to have a problem. It doesn't mean complete disaster, though last year kind of looked disaster-esque. But it just means that, like, LaFleur's going to want to run one thing, Rodgers is going to want to run another thing, and guess what they're going to do? They're going to run the Rodgers stuff. Maybe the LaFleur stuff is pretty good, right? It might be pretty good. It was pretty good in his past, iterations as an offensive assistant. Like, that's why he got the job, right? And it just so happened Aaron Rodgers just kept being good, was winning MVPs there for a couple of years. And like, not that they were dying to get rid of him necessarily, but they had to kind of wait. And you saw it. It was kind of like, oh no, Aaron, you're leaving? Oh, poop. Darn it. And it's like, I'm going, guys. And they're like, oh, shoot. And they're like, and he's like doing speaking of old references, Cable Guy, Jim Carrey thing, where he's like making the loud noise as he's walking away. Like, all right, guys, see ya later. Bye. Right. Like, he's hoping somebody comes to the door and like, Aaron, no, come back. We'll give you whatever you want. They're like, no, we're okay. We're going to try this whole thing. And like, people don't love it because it's like, I don't really know this receiver or that receiver. Pretty sure having a bunch of guys under 25 years old is kind of a good thing in the NFL, or like any of like the peak athletic sports that we all follow, right? Like nobody's like, oh man, I really wish they had more 32-year-olds. This team would really be something if they had some guys who are like a step slower than their prime. It's like, or they could just surround him with a bunch of guys in their prime. The defense, I think, is going to be really good. Jair Alexander, Rashawn Gary, Preston Smith, all high profile, like top end guys at each level. And they also have a bunch of depth at that position. And so I think Jordan Love can be last year's version of Aaron Rodgers. I'd even venture to say that he can be better than last year's version of Aaron Rodgers. Now, that doesn't mean that Aaron Rodgers, by the way, is going to absolutely stink for the Jets, because I think we see sort of new life in Aaron Rodgers. But what happens with his new team, right? Like, what happens when you break up with your girl and she goes somewhere else? Like, what happens over there has nothing to do with what's happened in your life. You will bounce back. You will have a great time with that woman out of your life. And that's the situation I think is going on here with the Packers, who are available as high as plus 400, 4-1 odds to win a division that, by the way, I think the Lions are going to score a lot this year, man. I think Jared Goff has been the quarterback of a team who has scored the most points in the league before. That was the Rams a few years ago. That's a wild thing to hear. Mm-hmm. But it means that it doesn't disqualify the Lions from being the highest scoring team in the NFL this year. They're going to be in a lot of games late. They're going to be a lot of shootouts, I think, because the defense has a couple of players, but I don't think it's quite there to the point where like the Lions are running time off the clock. The schedule breaks nicely as far as Jared Goff only has to go outside in the wintertime once. And even that is to Chicago, which they scored like 35 points against last year anyway. And again, as I mentioned, I don't think their defense is particularly good again this year. So like Jared Goff might be out here like finding all these guys on his team. And he's got a really good offensive coordinator, Ben Johnson, that people are like crazy for. You watch the Lions literally just like shuffle running backs out and shuffle new running backs in, which is exactly how you want to treat the running back position. So I think the Lions might score a lot of points. If you want to back the Lions, it's absolutely most points. I think there's a 14-1 available there out in the marketplace for Lions most points. But I don't want to trust the Lions defense. I don't want to trust them to necessarily win 13 games, right? I don't want to take those high-end results. I don't expect them to get to the playoffs for the first time in a billion years and win a bunch of games in the playoffs. I don't want them to win the Super Bowl, to win the NFC. I just want them to play a lot of close games. Whether they win them, they lose them, I don't care. I think they're going to score a lot. I think they're going to score a lot in week 1 against the Chiefs. I think they're a little interesting as a money line play in week 1. We can talk about that next week. But I think that's the way you play the Lions. You don't play them at plus 135 to win the division. And by the way, I think the Vikings take a massive step back. They are one Kirk Cousins injury. Now, if you watch quarterbacks in the offseason, you know, the Netflix show, you know, like this guy was hanging on by a thread in a lot of these games as far as just constantly getting hit and everything. It was like, oh, he's getting wrapped up. He's getting shot up. He's getting massaged and this, that, and whatever. And that's life as a quarterback in general. But the older you get, the less mobile you get, the more apt you are to get injured. And if Kirk Cousins gets injured, as crazy as this sort of is to say, because like it's just Kirk Cousins, the defense is going to be bad. And if you're not getting the ball to Justin Jefferson, like kind of what else do you have left, right? And Jordan Addison, I think, is an interesting player as well. But like, what if you're not getting it to those guys? And the backup situation in Minnesota is a horror show. This is one where like if you can sleep at night, and I think we all can, you bet the Vikings to have like the worst record in the league or the least points, and you kind of just go, not for a ton, but you're going to get a big number. You throw a couple of bucks on that, 40, 50-1, those type of numbers, and you go like, well, maybe if he gets hurt and I've got $5 on a 40-1 type deal, that kind of makes things interesting the rest of the way. And so I think the Vikings winning that division, we're sharper than we were from an odds standpoint, like even 10 years ago, where like the Vikings might be the favorite this year if this was 2009, for example.
Yeah.
But I still think it's kind of too high for them to be like plus 265. They exist almost to mask the idea that the Packers are probably just as good, if not a better team this coming season. So I think there's just a ton of value on the Packers, as I think they should probably be something closer to the Minnesota's price at plus 265. And that's just straight up value right there.
I like it. And recapping just some of the good value bets here we talked about in terms of the NFC North, liking. And hey, part of what we do here is me being talked some sense into by you, Mr. Matt Russell, and obviously the Green Bay Packers to win said division. And if I like to root for Justin Fields, the way to go about that would be for Justin Fields to win Offensive Player of the Year. The last thing I want to do here, because I think what we're going to do is we're going to split this season preview into 2 episodes, right? So as we wrap up this first episode in terms of the NFC, I want to ask you for the odds to win the NFC. What stands out to you the most when we look at these odds to win the NFC? If I start with some teams at the top here, we got the Eagles at plus 300, the Niners at plus 360, the Cowboys at plus 600, the aforementioned Lions at plus 948, and the Seahawks at plus 1400. Is there something there, or even maybe better value with a team I didn't mention here, but in terms of winning the NFC, what say you?
Yeah, so it's the type of thing where it's like, okay, are we betting because we actually think this team can go to the playoffs, win a bunch of playoff games, and win the Super Bowl? We've talked about it before. Rather than bet the Super Bowl, most of the time, I rather bet the conference because I know what I'm going to do. Once they win if I bet the Super Bowl, a team to win the Super Bowl, they make the Super Bowl. I'm going to spend 2 weeks trying to talk myself in and out of like hedging things and like, how am I going to do this and how I'm going to do that? It's like, you know what, man, let's just bet them to win the conference. It's a lower number, but I'm also not going to do anything dumb when it comes to like, if they make it to the Super Bowl. So in the NFC, like the idea here is like, okay, the Eagles are good. The Cowboys are good. You know, they're not necessarily going to beat themselves up. Maybe they split again this year and they could still end up with pretty good records. But the Commanders and the Giants are getting a little bit better, and their schedules are getting a little bit tougher as well. So we have to look for a team who's going to, I don't want to say sneak their way into like a monster season, but like that's kind of where the Eagles were last year, right? Where their win total, I think, was like 8.5 or 9 before the season started. And then just like lined up perfectly. We ended up cashing them on being the last undefeated team. And they ended up kind of rolling to this 14-3 type of record. So obviously, like when it comes to a betting standpoint, like I just made a really, so I think a strong case for the Packers. They are 35-1 to win the NFC. And if you're winning your division, you're getting a first round, home game. Now, I used to say when there was 2 buys, it was like you want to shoot for the team who's going to get a buy in that first round. Now the problem is we're down to only just 1 buy. That could be any of these teams, right? Any of the NFC East teams, any of the NFC West teams necessarily. So I kind of have to lower my standards as far as like just take the longest shot division winner that you think can actually win a playoff game. So like Tampa Bay, we talked about it. And you go, well, they're 65-1 to win the NFC. And it's like, I'm not asking Tampa Bay to compete with the NFC. I'm asking Tampa Bay to compete with the Panthers, the Falcons, and the Saints, right? I'm like, I'm not delusional. I'm not going like, this is a team that's got a chance. If the Packers are actually good enough to win their division, then 35-1 starts getting really interesting from a conference standpoint. Other than that, if I think the Eagles and the Cowboys are about the same, Eagles are plus 250, Cowboys are plus 600, right? So I just think there's a kind of an, even though the odds don't necessarily sort of agree with it, but I told you why I don't necessarily agree with those odds.
I gotcha.
Kind of think there's a better chance that the Packers win their division than I do the Cowboys win their division, if that makes any sense. But yeah, like Cowboys plus 600, Packers 35-1. Like those are the 2 options for me. Because like I mean, Seahawks at 14-1, like that's a little bit interesting. But again, I'm only asking them to beat the 49ers in that division, right? I'm not asking to beat 3 other viable teams. Whereas if Green Bay can beat those 3 other viable teams, like you said, you kind of like the Bears, the Vikings, at least won it last year, and the Lions are the favorite. If they're better than those 3 teams, then like they're obviously maybe potentially a contender. So to me, it's Cowboys and Packers in the NFC.
That was incredible. A great start here on the Clutch Picks pod. Again, we just went through all of our nice little sneaky picks, some value picks in terms of the entire NFC. We will stretch this into a part 2 in which we will discuss the AFC. That will be coming up right after this. But if the people want to find you online, my dude, where can they find you to get more of your information and the content that you put out weekly, daily at The Score, my dude?
Yeah, at The Score, the betting section over there. Just download. And I'm sure you all probably have the Score app already on your phone. If you just go into news, you slide it to the left. We're the very first thing there when you're on bet mode. The betting section there. I'd say 80 to 90% of our NFL content will be me this year. We'll get fired up with the round robin underdog money line parlay every week. And of course, any bets that kind of pop into our head over the course of the season in any one of these markets, right? We'll see coach of the year, comeback player, all of that kind of thing. Just constantly writing NFL bets for The Score. And of course, on social media at MRussAuthentic on what was, as you said, formerly known as Twitter or X. Everything I write basically gets retweeted through there. And then, of course, you can celebrate and commiserate Sundays, Mondays, and Thursday nights when we're sweating some of these games and complaining about officials and coaches and all of that fun stuff that honestly, I miss just, we had a couple of games there in the preseason in college football where it was like, guys, we got to talk about this. And, sometimes you're yelling into the ether, but not on Mondays, Thursdays, and Sunday nights. Everybody's around to talk about what in God's name are we actually watching? And that's honestly the most fun stuff outside of trying to handicap all this stuff and find some winning bets.
Yes, indeed, my friend. And you can follow me on the aforementioned app, formerly known as Twitter, at Shell Alexander, on Instagram at Sheldon Alexander. Of course, like and subscribe wherever you're getting this podcast. You're listening to it. Bless us with the like, bless us with the retweet, all that other fun stuff. Hope you enjoyed this, the episode 1, part 1 of the Clutch Picks NFL betting season preview. Part 2 will be on the way. And as I always say on these pods, I used to pray for times like this to rhyme like this. This is Clutch Picks. Until next time, see ya.